We're going to start on that very first page, Skills 1. And that very first page is all about rounding. Okay. We have a couple of problems here. Problem A, which is the first one here, says round 471 to the nearest 100. We're trying to round 471 and we're going to the nearest 100. Really quickly, show of hands. I want you to raise your hand if you remember working on rounding in 3rd grade. Okay, good. Some of us do, some of us don't remember it. That's okay.
What does it look like?
The front page says skills. 4th grade, second 6 weeks, skills. And it's that very first page. It says skills 1.
Right here.
Usually,
Look at everything from the back. You gotta look at it from the front. So.
for rounding, there's a rule.
Yes, is what it's supposed to be?
Find it, Ezekiel?
No.
No? It's a thicker stack of paper stapled together.
That's for homework.
Found it? You're still looking?
Yes.
Okay.
Man.
So, there's usually a rule or a rhyme that people use to remember what to do with rounding. Does anyone remember what that rule or what that rhyme was from 3rd grade? People say it a little bit differently, so might be a couple of different versions, but does anyone remember what that rhyme or what that rule was about rounding? Okay? No, you don't remember? Or did you have a question? Okay, because we had our hand up. Sure, you don't have a question or anything? Okay. Who can tell me what's that rule or that rhyme for rounding? Christopher?
That if it passes 5, that it can round to the next number.
Very good. So the rule is that if it's greater than 5, you round to the next number. Now again, there's usually a rhyme that people use to remember. So the rhyme usually goes 5 or more, add 1 more. Five or more, add 1 more, or sometimes they say up 1 more. 4 or less, and again, this part, it changes depending on who's the one saying the rhyme. Some people say 4 or less, stay with the rest, or let it rest, or something like that. Usually what I say is 4 or less, let it rest. They're talking about the number 471. If I look at this number line, I see that it starts at 400 and then it starts going up by tens. 410, 420, 430, 440, 450, 460, 470. Yes, I definitely would write it, Violet, just like I have it here. 470. My number's 471. So it's right next to that line for 470. Right there. And I tried to make it kind of big so it's easy to see. my line here for 471, who can tell me, is it closer to 500 or is it closer to 400? Which one is it closer to? Alexa?
Closer to 500.
Closer to 500 than it is to 400. I can see that, just like with what Christopher said. If I use the rule, my number is 471. Whenever you're going to round, like in this case, I'm rounding to my hundreds, I check the number right next to it, its neighbor. The neighbor is a 7. And if I use that rule or that rhyme, 7 is more than 5. That means I need to add one more. So the 4, if I had 4 and I add one more, I would get 5. Now the place values after it are where rounding gets his name. We call it rounding because after you change, or if you have to let it rest, after you figure out whether you're going up or you're staying the same, all the lower place values, they become zeros. So the end of your number has round zeros. That's why we call it rounding, because the end of your number is nice and round. 471 would round to 500. Problem B is similar, but they give us a different number. Round 235 to the nearest 100. Okay. 235. And I'm going to round to the nearest 100. So let's check with the neighbor. My neighbor is a 3. If my neighbor is a 3, and I think back to this rule here, what am I going to do to my hundreds place? Is it going to go up one more, or is it going to stay the same? Okay?
You're gonna let it rest?
I'm going to let it rest because my neighbor is just a 3. It's a 4 or less. So that means that 2, I'm going to leave it alone. It's going to stay a 2. But I'm still rounding. So even though the 2 stays the same, my smaller place values turn into zeros. So that the end of my number is round. So if I round 235, it would round to 200. I could see that if I put my number on my place value, or not on my place value chart, on my number line. Here's 230. 235 is about here. And I can see that, yeah, it's closer to 200 than it is to 300. So it should come back down here, 200. Problem C is similar. They're giving us a little bit bigger number though, just to see, just to test. 8,284. And this time we're rounding to the nearest 1,000. Well, it doesn't matter what place value you round to. No matter how big the number is, no matter what place value you round to, it's always the same. You check with your neighbor, You figure out what you're doing. Are you going up 1 or are you staying the same? If the neighbor to my thousands place is a 2, what am I going to do? What do I need to do if the neighbor to my thousands place is a 2? Am I going to go up 1 or am I going to stay the same? Kylie?
Stay the same.
I'm going to stay the same because, again, 4 or less, you let it rest. So the 8 stays the same. But I am rounding, so all the smaller place values turn into 0. So at the end of my number is round. So if I round 8,284 to the thousands place, my answer would be 8,000.